All right, thank you very much for your attention and your interest. Soil, to us, is a very sexy topic, but it's not necessarily for everybody else. So I'm really heartened to see everybody here. So the hidden half of nature was really sort of a journey for us in many ways. And oddly enough, it was a journey where we didn't really go anywhere in a sense. We went to lots of places in our mind, but this was not a book that we traveled around for, except, thank you. We didn't really travel around, except we went to the backyard, and that is where we met our protagonists. Now, I imagine that you're familiar with a lot of the things up here. These are all of the microorganisms, common types of microorganisms. And people sometimes ask, what really is a microorganism? I'm going to give you a really simple definition, and it is this. A microorganism is a single-celled life form, and single-celled means tiny. They're very difficult to see, so they're invisible to us. But yet, they are there. They are there in the soil, and as I hope I can convince you, they are also in our bodies. The only one that's a little odd here is people say, fungi? Why is that? I thought a mushroom? Well, actually, yeast are kind of fungi, and they are a single-celled organism. And also, over here is archaea. The archaea means ancient one, and for a long time, microbiologists thought, that's just a bacterium. You know, moves like one, looks like one, and then they did genomic analysis, and archaea are completely different. So, nonetheless, this is the microbial world, and this is who we met along the way in our journey. Now, I need to tell you a little something about myself. In addition to being a biologist, I have a bad case of plant lust, okay? I was a wannabe gardener when we first bought our house in Seattle. I'd kicked around with doing gardening in college and so on, but finally, a bigger piece of ground to work with. And we did sort of the opposite of what's going on in Seattle today. We cleared everything off of the lot except for the house. And that's when I discovered my dream dirt. No, look at this stuff. This is dirt that was dashing my dreams. This made me not just unhappy, but it sent me into a panic, okay? One thing to keep in mind is just that roof line. It's going to come back later in a couple of shots. And this is the beginning of what I call my organic matter chronicles. This was the beginning of my education as a gardener. And I thought, okay, I've done enough gardening and I know enough biology that I need to start getting some organic matter into the soil. And the first thing I started with was to paint up my wheelbarrow. Okay, very important. You must put flames on the wheelbarrow. But if I were to do this today, having done all the research and writing for the hidden half of nature, I should really have microbes painted on this wheelbarrow. This is kind of a fossil fuel intensive theme, but we all get what it means, right? So next wheelbarrow is getting microbes on it. Painted it up, and then I started collecting organic matter as close to home and as cheaply as possible. And I imagine there's a few gardeners out there, and if there are these, you can read up here what these different piles are. N just means a nitrogen source. Carbon refers to, C refers to a carbon source. And so these were the things that I kept collecting. And we have something kind of neat in Seattle, and it's Zoodoo. Now, I can't be Gabe Brown. I can't be bringing cows home and things like that. I mean, as it was, Dave was a little alarmed at some of the things I was doing because I would load the car up with tons of coffee grounds and bring it home and say, look, coffee grounds. And he looked and said, what are you doing? And I said, you just wait and see, because I think this is going to make a difference. Zoodoo is the composted manure of giraffes and elephants and the other herbivores at the Seattle Zoo. So if you're lucky enough, you have to put a card in for a lottery, and if your card is picked, you get to go get Zoodoo. So this is how I was getting some animal manure into the garden. And these are just some other items. in my mulch mixes. I would take all of this stuff, I would mix it up in the barrow, and this is more of a summertime mulch. You can see a lot of fresh green matter in there. You can see the neighbor's bouquet. I thanked her, and then I said, have these inside for a few days, and then boom, into the mulch mix they go. And what a lot of people think when it comes to gardening is, oh, geez, I got to dig all that stuff in. No, 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 no. Remember what Dave said? The more you dig in the soil, it's like pulling the roof off of this place and stirring. And that is scrambling and maiming and killing the life of the soil. So not only did I not want to do that, I had done enough gardening, and I bet there's some people out there too, that trying to dig things into the soil can be very backbreaking. It is a lot of labor. And we were kind of under the gun here. This was August. Even in Seattle, it can get very hot. And I was, like I said, freaked out about that soil that we started with. So I layered these mulch mixes about this high on all the beds. And the funny thing about it is I started doing this the first summer, and it has continued on, and it has never really ended. And there was a question about my mulch mixes that was in some ways the start of the hidden half of nature, because where is all of this stuff going? Why am I constantly collecting organic matter, mixing it up in the barrel, laying it out, and thinking I'm done? Where is this stuff going? And I'll answer that question in a minute, but here is, after several seasons, you can see that horrible soil that we started with, and then this is the new soil that's slowly accumulating beneath one of my layers of mulch. So when you think about building soil, it's not really from the ground up, it's kind of from the top down. And I did this, I started to see differences in the color of the soil after a couple of years. Very thin, dark layers started to form. This is probably 6 or 7 years after doing all of the mulching. And so if you think about the rate at which the soil is being improved and made here versus the slide that Dave showed you of nature's rate of an inch about every 1,000 years, there's not many things we can do better than Mother Nature, but making soil through adding organic matter, I would posit, is one of those things actually. Okay, so there you can see on the left what we started with, and on the right pretty much where our soil is now. And carbon content-wise, sort of on average across the yard when we started, it was somewhere around 1 or 2%. And now it's as high as around 10, 12% in the veggie bed. And in the regular ornamental beds and beneath our eco lawn, it's somewhere around 7 or 8%. So imagine if every gardener on this planet and in this country started stashing organic matter into mulches, and that's breaking down, and it's taking all of that excess carbon up in the atmosphere, and it's pulling it down to earth, and it's binding it up and keeping it in some form of life. So this could be a big help on the climate change front. All right, so if that's going on below ground, this is what we have above ground. There's that roof line again. Dave talks about the farmers and their crops are soybeans or corn or tillage radishes. My crops are maple trees and flowers and vines. And it's still amazing to me to think that this came out of what we started with, all that dead dirt. And also, of course, a veggie bed is often a garden within a garden. And the veggie bed gets all of my special attention and a lot of my really nice organic matter. I have a worm bin that our food scraps go in, and that is choice stuff, and that's what the veggie bed gets. All right, so I did a lot of labor. I did a lot of work. Dave helped. I would enlist him in certain tasks, and he was always a good sport. And so we thought, gosh, we've done all this heavy lifting. I brought tons and tons of organic matter home, but there was heavier lifting going on beneath our feet, quite quite literally. We're all familiar with sort of these macro life forms in the soil, like this earthworm. But something that most people probably are less familiar with is the microbes. So our chewers and chompers, earthworms and others, they start the initial deconstruction of organic matter, and it gets it down to a size that eventually a tiny, tiny microbe can deal with. And so this is a clump of bacteria right here. And this large green thing, this is a root hair, even tinier than a root. And these diffuse shapes around the root are one of those kinds of microbes. It's a mycorrhizal fungi that is surrounding that root. And I want to focus on, I want to keep it with the microbes. These also are barely, this guy you can see, very small microarthropod. This is a nematode. And what's interesting about things slightly larger than the mycorrhizal fungi and the bacteria is they get eaten, right? Life in the soil is an eat or be eaten kind of proposition. And these nematodes are hoovering up bacteria like crazy. And bacteria happen to be, their little tiny one-celled bodies happen to be quite rich in nitrogen. Nitrogen is one of the three main things that a plant needs to grow. And the beauty of this system is that a microbe dies, it becomes a little tiny nitrogen packet. This nematode is also pooping out microbes. And that manure of that nematode is also very rich in nitrogen. So it's putting the nitrogen right in the zone of the roots where they need it. I'm not running off to the nursery to buy bags of fertilizer. I'm letting nature do it for me, but I need to be feeding these microbes with the organic matter. And one thing about the microbial communities in the soil is that in addition to the organic matter, they are also feasting on other things called exudates. And exudate, just think about that word for a minute. Embedded in that word is exude. Along with, if you think of something exuding, think oozing, thinking flowing. Not in a bad way, but in a very good way. Because these exudates flow out of the roots of plants into a place called the rhizosphere. And that is, if you picture a halo-like zone, very, very close to the root, all around that root system, that is what is called the rhizosphere. And that is the area that these exudates are flowing into. And it's estimated that a plant will use about 40% of the energy it obtains through photosynthesis, and it uses that energy to manufacture these exudates. And these exudates, you're thinking, God, what is she talking? What is flowing out of these roots anyway? Food. Proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And here are the microbes sitting there in the rhizosphere, lapping it up like dogs eating their dinner. And why would all of this be happening? For some very interesting reasons. It's really a biological bazaar down there in the rhizosphere. And what you have is exudates coming out, and you've got bacteria primarily right around that root, and fungi as well. They're eating that, and microbes themselves, we all have waste products. I've heard there's been a lot of talk at the conference about toxins and digestion and poop and all of that kind of stuff. Microbes do it too, but in the case of the soil and the rhizosphere, we need to get this notion of waste product out of our minds, because these microbial metabolites that are coming out of the soil microorganisms are things like plant growth promoting hormones. So the plant, in many cases, is relying on a bacterium to make the hormones that the plant needs to grow. So this is very, very unusual. In addition, plants will also rely on microbes for information about what's happening in the soil. Say there's a pathogen coming at the plant root. The root microbiome can tell the plant, hey, you've got Fusarium wilt coming at us. You've got Verticillium wilt coming at us. you better start beefing up your plant immune system. So there is a lot of communication and signaling between the plant and its root microbiome. And when it comes to fungi, they're attached on the outside and even on the inside of a plant root by one end of their fungal body. The other one is out over here, prospecting in the soil for things that the plant's roots can't reach. They're too far away. And so fungi will fetch. I call them our fetching fungi. And they will bring phosphorus back. That's also one of the 3 main nutrients that plants need. It will also bring some of these other essential minerals. David mentioned zinc. That's another thing. So what you basically have in this biological bazaar is it's an intense exchange of physical goods, of information, and communication. And this is really the grand health plan for the botanical world. Because long before there were agrochemical companies, farmers or gardeners, all the botanical world had was its microbiome. All it had was all of this communication and signaling that happens with the microbes in the soil. Just to give you an up close, here's a picture of our fetching fungi running there through a soil particle, fetching things, transporting them back to the plant in exchange for exudates. Okay. So really what this all amounts to is plant intelligence, right? We often think we're so self-centered. Oh, the brain is on top of the body. We look at a plant and we see all the glorious growth and flowers and so forth above ground, and we think, oh, the roots, kind of blah. Oh, no, 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 no. We need to get that concept out of our minds. The root system kind of is a dual, both gut and brain for the botanical world. And so when Dave talked about soil life diet or fertilizer diet, a fertilizer diet, as you might imagine, is constantly interfering with all of this signaling and communication between the plant and its microbiome, and it messes up this intelligence. And that in a nutshell is sort of the whole problem with having a very agrochemical intense farm, or for that matter, an agrochemical intense garden or any kind of landscape, right? These plants had it figured out a long, long time ago about how to grow and how to stay healthy. And so it might behoove us to think about a plant's green body as something that knows what to do already, but we just need to support it and sort of get out of the way at times. Okay, so not only plants have a microbiome, but every living organism on this planet. And the point of this is not to memorize, please, any of this slide. The point is, this is a farm, and all of these organisms, the plants and the animals, all have a microbiome. And if the plant microbiome is doing all of those things that I just talked about, what is going on with other microbiomes? And that's where it comes to us, to the human microbiome, because we too have a microbiome. And what I want to tell you is that on the whole, our microbiome, when it's functioning properly, is far, far more beneficial than it is harmful. And here's a few quick factoids to ground you in a couple of things. In terms of the cells, our microbial cells that are part of our human microbiome and our own bodily cells, the ratio is about somewhere around 3 microbial cells to every 1 human cell. In other words, there's more of us than them. And also, when it comes to genes, just the bacterial members of the human microbiome, it's estimated, are adding about 2 million genes to our genome. We have on our own, what we each got from our mom and our dad, a genome that's estimated to be around 23,000 genes. So 23,000 is a lot less than 2 million. You add in fungi, virus, archaea, all of the other members of the human microbiome, and it's estimated that the total microbial number of genes in our bodies is somewhere around 4 to 6 million. Okay, that's a lot. It's kind of creepy, a little bit maybe. It's kind of cool if you're a biologist, if you're into your gut, if you're into the microbiome, because all of this has a good deal to do with our health. And that's what the next part of this is going to be about. And I'm going to take you to a place that I never thought I would be up in a talk telling people we're going to go deep. We're going to go to the bottom the bottom of the digestive tract, and that would be the colon. Okay, so I want to just quickly place us. Not talking about the stomach, not talking about those sausage-looking loops that you often see in diagrams. That's the small intestine. I'm talking about the colon. It's about the lower 5 feet of the digestive tract. And this is just a three-dimensional image here. And you can see, obviously, the colon has a central opening. That's called the lumen, a nice thick layer of mucus there. A lot of the human microbiome is hunkered down there in the mucus. That's where it lives. And interesting factoid about our colon, most of our microbiome is not in our brain or on our skin or in between our toes. It is in the colon, the lion's share of the microbiome. That is where all of these critters live. This is your onboard ecosystem. The other interesting thing about the colon is that most of our immune system, estimated somewhere around 70 or 80% of our immune system and tissue, is associating with the digestive tract, mostly around the colon. So this is very, very interesting, and the rest of these next 3 or 4 slides, I'm going to show you what is going on here. Okay, so this is just a cross-section through the colon. What we have, this is the inside of the colon, this is the outside of the colon, okay? And you have cells lining the colon, 1 cell thick, okay? That's not much, but there is a lot of stuff happening in there. So inside the colon, you've got that mucus layer, you've got members of your microbiome, you've got food particles, you've got pathogens. That's where all of that stuff is. Down here, just on the outside of the colon wall, is a kind of an immune cell called a dendritic cell. And you've been looking at this picture. You can see what's going on here. These dendritic cells are really cool, I think. Okay, here's what they're doing. They're sort of shapeshifters, and they can squeeze an arm in between your 2 colon cells. Maybe they're doing that now, in some of us, maybe. All right? And that dendritic cell is going to catch a little sample. It's going to get a molecular sample from that member of the microbiome, and it's going to come back down out of the colon, and it's going to show that molecular sample to some pals of it. We've all heard of T cells. I'm sure someone else in this conference has been talking about T cells. It's another part of the immune system. T cells do a number of different things. There's about a dozen different types or so. I want to talk about the T cells that are involved in inflammation. Because you have some kinds of T cells, when they get the right molecular sample from this dendritic cell, they will activate. And they activate into either a pro-inflammatory T cell, which is to say, it revs up inflammation. Now, inflammation, I think, gets kind of a bad rap these days, mostly because it's going on for too long or too much in our bodies. But when things are healthy, when things are functioning normally, inflammation is a good thing. This is what kills abnormal cells and cancer cells. This is what, say somebody picked up a bug at this conference. Your immune system is going to kick up the inflammatory process, and it's going to get that pathogen out of your body. But as soon as that work is done, inflammation is a very, very intense and hardworking process. And so when it's done, you want it to be finished, and you want the anti-inflammatory kind of T cell to move in and say, okay, everything's taken care of, let's get back at an even keel, and let's go about our day. And so what we're learning about the microbiome, I think maybe you're already putting this together in some sense, is that these dendritic cells communicating with the microbiome, activating either pro-inflammatory T cells or anti-inflammatory T cells. And this is an entirely different way to look at the microbial world. It's a different way to look at our immune system. Our immune system is really reliant on our microbiome in many ways for information about what's happening in the colon, what's happening in the body, what's happening outside the body. Because our immune system is stuck in our body, and so it's communicating and gathering information about what is happening. And this, I think, means that the colon this little place that we never like to talk about. Our colons are really not an onboard garbage can. That idea is garbage, okay? Our colons, properly working, the microbiome properly fed, and I'll get into that in a little bit, is really an onboard medicine chest. That is really what is going on, okay? And so you may be wondering, it's almost 2020, and how did we miss this? How did we miss the fact that microbiome and immune cells are in this sort of hand-in-glove relationship? It's a very symbiotic relationship. How did we miss this? There's a good reason. There's a good reason, because when you look back in history, this is some of the earliest epidemiological work, and where that red circle is up there, this is all of the things that killed people in the city of London in the year 1664 for a one-year time period. And plague is circled up there, and it killed a little over 7,000 people. The plague is due to a microorganism. And so we began to see, not in 1664, it would be another 200 years before we really connected up certain species of microbes with infectious disease. And so one by one, you know, we learned about cholera is a virus, tuberculosis is a bacterium, polio is a virus. We painted the entire microbial world with the pathogen brush. And that, my friends, has led us very, very astray for quite a long time up until now. And what has been sort of the consequences of this? Let's fast forward. And that graph on your left shows various kinds of infectious diseases that in the post-war years started to come down. We've greatly controlled, in the Western world anyway, most infectious diseases, or we have entirely eradicated them. But something odd was also happening. And why are these diseases, you know, coming down? Why these steep descent? Clean water has probably done more than anything to curb infectious disease. Vaccines do have their place. This has helped a lot with certain diseases, as have antibiotics. Antibiotics saved my grandmother of dying from tuberculosis, for example. I imagine others in here, their parents or grandparents, if you were in that time period, that saved a lot of lives. But at the same time, you can see this graph on the right. These are the so-called chronic diseases, or in other words, there's not an infectious pathogen behind, say, multiple sclerosis, or Crohn's, or many of the gut disorders, diabetes, and so on. The list, though, is long on the chronic diseases that are taking most of us out these days, or at least reducing our lifespan or our quality of life. And it spans these things listed up here and even more. So why is this happening? Sort of the hypothesis among microbiome research is this: are we possibly missing some of our microbes? Right? Think about that communication between gut microbiota and immune cells. What if we're missing some of our microbes and our immune cells are not getting information or signals that regulates many, many things in our body, from our mood to how we deal with pathogens to various aspects of our metabolism and biochemistry. So I don't want to go into all of the reasons that we might be missing our microbes, but I'm sure everyone in this room can figure out why antibiotics, overuse and inappropriate use of antibiotics, why the microbiome is going to take a hit. They kill off microbes. That's what they're supposed to do. But there's another factor with our microbiome that you may not have thought of, and that is what we're sending down the hatch. And this is our diet. And the reason I have this up here is that when it comes to our diet and our digestive tract, as I said, most of the microbiome, is down here in the colon. And you really need to take to heart this inner ecosystem that you've got. These organisms need to eat every day just like you do. And they cannot get up out of your body and go over and have quinoa salad, okay? They are stuck inside of you and they rely on what you eat. And your microbiota will eat anything. They will eat plant foods, they will eat animal foods. And the byproducts that they excrete in your colon are very different depending on the proportion of plant foods and animal foods that you are eating. I want you to focus on the two largest arrows on this diagram. The problem with the Western diet, which is, as we know, it's a lot of meat protein, it's a lot of sugars, not very healthy fats, and that feeds the brain. The brain likes all of that stuff. But the microbiome doesn't really. And I'll show you how all that processes in just a second. But look at what's going on down here at the gut health diet. What it's telling us is to sort of minimize the amount of simple carbs that you have. There's more in the hidden half about these harmful metabolites and why this arrow is bigger over here under the Western diet. But look at this large, large arrow. When you eat an abundance of plant foods, and I'm not saying only plant foods, but an abundance, half of your plate, half of your bowl, plant foods. The microbiota get a hold of that, they continue to feed on it, and they are producing beneficial metabolites that remain not only in the colon, but they can travel, go through the colon wall into the bloodstream, and off they go to another part of your body. And this leads me to another question then. So our microbiota consuming all of these plant foods in our colon, and we have all seen this phrase, you are what you eat. Well, let's just explore that, because I want to impress upon you that there's more to it than just that. And it starts with this. There's about some 300,000 plant species are estimated overall on the planet. I believe that's the number. We only consume about 200 in our diet through the kinds of plants that we grow in agriculture. So while it is true that we used to eat a wider variety of plant species, 200 is still not bad if you can access all of them. And the reason I bring this up is that Bacteroides theta iota omicron, please do not say that. We're just going to call that B theta. That's the microbe, that's the bacterium I'm going to talk about. B theta has a genome, as you can see up here, that encodes about 300 enzymes capable of breaking down plant foods. The reason B theta can do that and we can't is that our paltry 23,000 genes, our bodies do not make the enzymes to totally break down plant foods. And so they sail through our digestive tract and they land in the colon there in front of the microbiota, and it's pretty much tranquil grazing pastures because B theta and all of the pals that B theta hangs out with down there in the colon, they're consuming and finishing the digestion of these plant foods. And that's where many of these beneficial microbial metabolites come from. Either these microbes can turn a plant food into one of these beneficial metabolites, or the bacterium can produce it on its own. And why would we do this? Why would the human body be farming out this very important task of breaking down plant foods? Well, because long ago, we acquired our microbiomes long ago. And as soon as the microbes got into our bodies, through the water we drank out of rivers and streams, imagine digging up a tuber and it's covered with soil and soil organisms. It's pretty safe in our body compared to the nature out there if you're a little tiny one-celled organism. So they feed us and we feed them. And that's part of the story of B theta. And that's what I just went over. So I want to talk about short-chain fatty acids because they're one of the most common kinds of microbial metabolites. These are beneficial metabolites up here. The point again, don't memorize everything. Here's B theta up there with Bacteroid, all of its other Bacteroides species. These are the names of these different short-chain fatty acids. You can find lots of literature on these short-chain fatty acids and what they do in the human body. And these are some of the things. Again, please don't memorize this. I'll just highlight one of these. I talked a little bit about inflammation, and what we know about butyrate and propionate, these microbial metabolites, is that they activate what's called a regulatory T cell. That's the kind of T cell that dampens and quells inflammation. So this is how we can control inflammation in our bodies, is by feeding the members of the microbiome that churn out the metabolites, that communicate with the immune cells that are the anti-inflammatory cells. And the summary on this slide is this. Your microbiome, it's manufacturing these metabolites, does all of these things, keeping pathogens at bay, protection against cancer, and so on. I don't know about you, but when I see these lists of things, this is what it adds up to. This is much of our physical and mental well-being, right? So just like the botanical world, long before there were pharmaceutical companies, even long before there were supplement companies, what we had was the microbiome in our gut, the plant foods that were a part of our diet, and you put those two things together, and that is nature's intelligence enveloped within our bodies. I think that's pretty darn neat, actually. It's also miraculous how well this works, and it's also troubling how easily we can mess it up. So when it comes to the microbiome, I usually talk about, let's talk about protection of the microbiome first and foremost from the moment somebody is born. And if your microbiome has taken a hit, let's talk about restoration. And whether your microbiome is pristine or it's taken a hit, by all means, you've got to be cultivating your onboard medicine chest, which is also your inner ecosystem, right? So you can take all the probiotics you want, but if you're not feeding them, in they go and out they go. And that's also why I like to think about the populations in our gut as really, that's what you want to nurture and support. Sure, we need probiotics at times, and there's more research being done on how they can be paired with antibiotics, because when you're taking antibiotics, you're knocking out some of your microbiome. All right, so these are your personal alchemists. It's not just short-chain fatty acids. These are all of the different kinds of metabolites that have been discovered so far that are coming out of the human microbiome. And the upshot here is this. About 40% of the molecules and compounds in my body, circulating through my body right now, in yours, they were not made by my human cells, not by a liver cell or a kidney cell. They were made by a member of your microbiome. That's right. And so all of a sudden, for Dave and I, we thought, why didn't anybody ever tell us this? Why did no doctor ever tell us about these connections between diet and microbiome and your immune system? And partly, to be fair, this is very new science, right? Somebody who's been out of medical school, even for 10 years, probably is not aware of all of this. And we're still a long way from getting microbiome science and research translated into a standard of care. So for that reason, I think it's coming, but it's going to be a while. But just always be thinking of, what am I feeding my microbiome? So really, that adage needs to go like this. We and our crops, and if you eat animals, we and our crops and those animals are what our respective microbiomes eat. So the next time someone says, hey, you are what you eat, you have to say, oh, no. You're what your microbiome eats. Just remember that, okay? All right, and so the root and the gut. As it turns out these are very analogous systems. Maybe some of you have already been thinking about that. All of the nutrient acquisition and the processing that goes on by a plant's roots and in the human gut. I've been nattering up here at you about microbial metabolites. This is absolutely key when it comes to the root and the gut. Because what the feedstock is, so the feedstock is your diet if you're a person. If you're a plant, the feedstock is what kinds of organic matter, or hopefully the feedstock is not mostly chemicals. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about nutrients and the microbial metabolites that get churned out of what the root and the gut are eating. And all of this adds up hugely to immunity and defense, whether you're talking the green body of a plant or a human body. And I think when you put all of these three things together, what we're really talking about is biological intelligence. It's how our bodies evolved, it's how a plant's body evolved, and it's intricate and it's complicated and it's there for a reason, because when it is working and working well, we're happy, we're healthy. A crop, so much as a plant can be happy and healthy, if they could tell us, I think that they might. So these are the really significant parallels between the root and the gut. And if you even, these words up at the top, inside out, that means that if you were to take a plant root and turn it inside out and put all those little tiny root hairs on the inside, that's a rough facsimile of the human digestive tract, right? It's increasing all of the absorptive surface area. It's where all the signaling and communication is going on. All right, so long talk, lots of information here, microbes. I hope that David and I have brought the soil to life for you. I hope you understand more about the microbiome. And so later tonight, maybe someone says, hey, yeah, how was that Real Truth About Health conference? And you're like, so much information, especially like this root gut thing, and oh my gosh. And then I've boiled it down to 6 words. So all you need to tell them is this: mulch your soil inside and out. All right. Okay, I thank you for your attention. And we have books over here. David and I are here for a little while before we need to get off to the next event in about a half an hour or so. So happy to sign books, happy to answer more of your questions. Thank you again.